On behalf of the Department of Homeland Security, Dr. Tom McGinn and myself, we appreciate the opportunity to be here today and give a presentation to present the role of Homeland Security in animal identification, and particularly as it relates to the protection of critical infrastructure. 2 points that I want to make before we start. The first of which is that animal identification is, as it applies to traceability for animal health management or animal disease outbreaks, is merely a single tool of the full set of tools that are necessary to be able to manage animal health and respond to disease. Certainly, adequate preparation comes into play. Epidemiological and laboratory surge capacity is absolutely necessary. A vigorous risk assessment capability, the ability to provide permitting for transportation and the movement of negative animals in a disease outbreak, the development of countermeasures and the means of advancing disposal and decontamination technology for an animal disease outbreak. So all of those things must be considered as part of the overall protection of critical infrastructure as DHS looks at this animal ID issue. And secondly, I want to help you understand and consider the role of DHS in the protection of that critical infrastructure. Let's speak just a moment in the way of background about the Department of Homeland Security and about its genesis. As you'll recall, in 2002, November of 2002, the department was formed and became operational in January of 2003, subsequent to the attacks of 9/11. The Department of Homeland Security is a compilation of 22 different agencies in an effort to bring together interests and equities associated with Homeland Security. The Coast Guard, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, FEMA, the Transportation Security Administration, even some agricultural inspectors from APHIS were brought together to begin to address this idea of Homeland Security. This was the largest reorganization in government in 50 years since the creation of the Department of Defense. The mission of DHS then is to develop and coordinate the implementation of a comprehensive national strategy to protect the country against terrorism and terrorist attacks, to reduce the vulnerability to those attacks, and to minimize damage and assist in recovery in the event such an attack takes place. Additionally, the Department of Homeland Security acts as a focal point for national and man-made crises and, most importantly, emergency planning. Thus, Dr. McGinn's important role at the Department of Homeland Security. The Office of Health Affairs is only 2 years old, created in March of 2007, and acts as the principal advisor to the Secretary and to the Administrator of FEMA on public health and medical matters. OHA, the Office of Health Affairs, also provides biodefense capability and advances the idea of health preparedness architecture to ensure the security of the country. Within the Office of Health Affairs, within WMD and Biodefense, is the Food, Agriculture, Veterinary Defense Division. Our responsibilities, as are Dr. McGinn's, are advisors to the Secretary of Homeland Security and to the Administrator of FEMA. Additionally, the Food, Agriculture, Veterinary Defense Division coordinates the department's responsibility in the implementation of HSPD-9 that I'll speak to in a moment. Across the 30-some-odd programs within 6 components within DHS that have an interest in food, agriculture, and veterinary issues. And veterinary issues is an all-encompassing animal health and veterinary public health programs. And finally, Food and Agriculture Veterinary Defense Division helps coordinate activities with locals, with states, with the interagency and the private sector as they relate to those issues within the Department of Homeland Security. Now, executing the mission of the department DHS does so through its legislative authorities, through the delegation of various authorities, and finally through directives. Homeland Security Presidential Directive number 7 speaks to the identification and prioritization of and protection of critical infrastructure. Within each of the critical infrastructures are sector-specific federal agencies that have responsibilities. Obviously, within the agriculture and food sector, there is the USDA and the Health and Human Services departments. In coordination and collaboration with the Department of Homeland Security, then USDA, HHS developed a comprehensive national plan for the protection of critical infrastructure. Primary among those activities are the to define and prioritize, reduce the vulnerability, and coordinate protection of critical infrastructure across the country. Additionally, in the execution of our mission, HSPD 9, Defense of the United States Agriculture and Food, DHS has significant roles. HSPD 9 is in fact the cornerstone of the Office of Health Affairs and the Food, Agriculture, Veterinary Defense Division activities within the agriculture and food sector. DHS has the sole lead in the development of the biological threat awareness capacity for detection of attacks, and that is the bioterrorism risk assessment that's 2008 version was just released 2 weeks ago, and it assesses biological terrorists and promotes awareness across the full spectrum of the federal government. The DHS is also has the sole lead in cooperation with other departments and agencies for ensuring that there is adequate local response capabilities for the prevention of terrorist attacks, for the management of disease outbreak, or for natural disasters. The Department of Homeland Security, in cooperation with other departments, seeks to develop a coordinated agriculture food response plan, and finally, DHS has the sole responsibility for the development of and establishment of university-based centers of excellence, 2 of which in the University of Texas, at Texas A&M, the National Center for Zoonotic and National Center for Foreign Animal Disease, Foreign Zoonotic Disease. I'll get it in a minute. FASD, Foreign Animal and Zoonotic Disease Defense Center, and then the National Center for Food Protection and Defense at the University of Minnesota. And those 2 centers of excellence, in cooperation with their partners, are engaged in a variety of programs for the Department of Homeland Security. DHS co-leads with other departments to develop mitigation strategies and protect critical production nodes across the country. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Food and Ag Sector Criticality Assessment Tool. It was a data call that for which states provided information related to their food and agriculture critical infrastructure. Action item number 13 in HSPD 9, Customs and Border Protection in cooperation with APHIS have established a joint task force that works together at the border to ensure and to prevent the introduction of pests or animal diseases through a variety of means. And finally, in the news of late, the NVAF, the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility, that will ultimately provide secure biocontainment laboratories for foreign animal disease capabilities. Just a quick note about other critical infrastructure. They are all intimately related. There are 18 critical infrastructure and key resources across the country. Everything from nuclear power plants to water to chemical facilities, production facilities. The food and agriculture and food sector obviously is intimately associated with the water sector, the transportation sector, the energy sector, and banking and finance, and others to a lesser degree. Each of the other critical infrastructure have a similar mechanism of developing a sector-specific plan related to the protection of that sector, and designated federal agencies that are departments that are responsible. Critical infrastructure protection, DHS has a role in a number of areas through the Food and Agriculture GCC, Government Coordinating Council, Sector Coordinating Council, and in conjunction with infrastructure protection within DHS. You see the work group on the agriculture and food sector, the Food Sector Joint Committee on Research 2009 annual report, and of course the sector-specific plan for agriculture and food. Additionally, priority programs over the years, back to 2005, FBI, USDA, HHS, and DHS created the Strategic Partnership Program for Agri-Terrorism. FASTCAT, we've mentioned. FEMA actively engaged in the development of targeted capabilities list. The animal disease emergency response is completed last year. Actually, next week at the University of Minnesota, the National Center for Food Protection and Defense, the Food Defense and Food Safety targeted capabilities list activity will be initiated, and then finally public health will follow subsequent to that. Tabletop exercises through the GCC, SCC within DHS, Region 6 Food and Agriculture exercise in Oklahoma City, and a recent tabletop exercise in Crystal City. And of course, FEMA actively engaged in food and agriculture training programs at the Louisiana State University, at the University of Tennessee, at UC Davis, Kirkwood, and again FASD and NCFPD. The United States preparedness activities in the agriculture and food sector. Again, this is a full spectrum activity. USDA, Health and Human Services, Department of Homeland Security. Dr. Clifford talked about the new paradigm that we think about when we prepare, when we try to prevent, when we respond to and recover from incidents. But the old paradigm was purely response-oriented. Now the idea is prevention, protection, preparedness, response, and recovery. Within DHS, preparedness is manifest primarily through FEMA, through their grants program, to communities, to multi-state partnerships, to a variety of different activities around the country. Unfortunately, the food and agriculture sector has been woefully underrepresented in the receipt of funds for those type of activities, and we hope to continue to promote and push that sector with new recognition of its importance to Homeland Security. At FEMA, preparedness is a continuous improvement cycle and begins with planning, organizing, training, equipping, exercising, evaluating, and then taking corrective action to effectively coordinate for incident response. In surveillance, Office of Health Affairs, as we mentioned, within WMD and Biodefense, two important programs, the National Biosurveillance Integration Center, at which the National Biosurveillance Integration System operates. It is a worldwide assimilation of data, gathering of data, assimilation of data, and from that data, risks are characterized and information is disseminated to senior leaders in the participating departments and agencies throughout the United States government. BioWatch program, currently an early detection program in major municipalities throughout the country. An early detection program to try to identify aerosolized pathogens that are intentionally released, sometimes inadvertently released, as several reports have come about, but that are intentionally released to create a terrorist incident. Just last week in Denver, the national workshop for BioWatch gathered, and as this program comes to maturity, there has been a significant increase in veterinary participation in the BioWatch program in the country. And as a matter of fact, there were 11 veterinarians that were involved. They serve as advisors and consultants to the jurisdictions in which BioWatch detectors exist. And we have actually begun to create a BioWatch veterinary surveillance group. And as technology advances, it's not inconceivable that these same devices that currently monitor for aerosolized pathogens in municipalities around the country could be set up in animal agriculture areas to monitor for foreign animal diseases or existing animal diseases, and provide even greater, more early awareness of a disease process. The emergency response plans we mentioned in the from HFPD 9, the research, science, and technology integrated product teams develop, mature, deliver commercialized products for use within the Homeland Security arena by components and by customers of Department of Homeland Security for Homeland Security efforts. APHIS, ARS, Plum Island, recall that in 2003, the operation and maintenance of DHS, of Plum Island, was transferred to the Department of Homeland Security. However, USDA APHIS, USDA ARS retain their responsibilities for research and development of diagnostics and continue in that effort at Plum Island. Several exciting opportunities that will become available in the next few months, hopefully, is the first FMD vaccine that's been developed in over 60 years, and it's been created on a human adenovirus platform, so it's significantly more safe than other efforts. And then, of course, the countermeasures that are being developed at Plum Island, an idea of interferon or bio agents that will facilitate the efficacy of a vaccine as it's administered to critters. One last point here related to the protection of critical infrastructure. Some of you may have seen this depiction of a national incident management effort. It was created in cooperation between OHA and the USDA APHIS emergency management folks for presentation last year at U.S. Animal Health Association. In keeping with the national response framework's doctrines of engaged partnership and tiered responses, we see that there is a continuum of state, local, and federal activity throughout this response. I have to say, as we begin to look at the preparedness aspects of it, which, again, Dr. Clifford's pointed to, we have discussed, and Dr. McGinn points out so frequently, that not only is the disease management aspect of incident management important, but the emergency management aspect of incident management is important. And again, from his perspective, he looks at 5 different critical functions that are necessary, and I'm sure Dr. McGinn will speak to this as questions arise. But adequate preparedness, the ability to make rapid assessments, the necessity of effective planning, the immediate emergency management surge capacity, and again, as we all are concerned, about promotion of a viable recovery. But just quickly taking a look at this diagram, you see the Tier 1 incident. Literally 85% of the incidents across the country take place in that realm. There's state and local execution of lead. It's a state and local event. It's possible that there may be some mobilization of sector-specific agency resources within a state, but certainly there's not a departmental response. And finally, from the DHS perspective, we have a situational awareness of those events. As we move forward in degree of severity of the incident and the necessity for increased incident coordination, we see still there's the significant involvement by the states and locals. We see the departments, the respective departments, taking the technical lead and the coordination authority. Obviously, in an animal disease incident, that's USDA. And then we see DHS increasing their activities for the facilitation of interagency preparations to support. Be mindful that that is the role of the Department of Homeland Security in incident management support of the lead agency. And finally, the Tier 2 incidents represent about 12.5% to 13% of incidents that take place in the country. And finally, and thankfully, not in animal agriculture, but a catastrophic Tier 3 incident that takes place requires the mobilization of every resource that exists as a practical matter. The states and locals remain actively engaged. There's federal execution. The lead agency for an animal disease incident would be the Department of USDA, and then DHS Coordination Authority comes into play to bring resources to bear to facilitate and enable USDA to accomplish their mission. And then finally, as we move into the recovery phase, again, the same, there's involvement of all three of the particular entities within that. Now let's move back to the issue at hand, and that is the traceability and the idea of what's required to promote animal health management and promote animal disease response. And again, just as a hypothetical incident, we have the same criteria that always exist: surveillance and disease detection. And of course, within veterinary medicine, the astute clinical practitioner remains at the forefront, looking for clinical syndromes, clinical signs that might present as a foreign animal disease, which would lead to the role of the state and federal veterinary medical officers, and then of course the foreign animal disease diagnostician. As the FAD comes to bear with the possible identification of a disease on a premise, you see that those trained individuals immediately collect samples from affected animals. They gather epidemiological information. They implement biosecurity measures, even establishing quarantines, and making certain that the samples are submitted to the proper laboratory facilities. We see the laboratory confirmation, epidemiological association. Again, the state and federal folks come together, samples going to the respective laboratories, and then finally the traceback and animal disease containment. And again, it's no new information for you that the idea behind traceability is to limit the number of animal owners impacted by an outbreak, to enable the U.S. to determine areas that are free of disease, to preserve marketability of healthy animals, that is, transportation and movement, both domestically and internationally. Again, here's the timeline that obviously can vary significantly, but from exposure 2 to 5 days to the possible detection of foreign animal disease, again, dependent upon that astute clinical practitioner, to the collection of the specimen by the FADD, the shipment of the specimen to the National Veterinary Service Laboratories or Plum Island, laboratory testing and analysis, and then reporting to the proper authorities. There's a time span in there of anywhere from 7 to 12 days. Obviously, a lot can happen during that time as we think about transportation of product, transportation of animals throughout the country. Now, and again, fortunately, we've not had an animal disease incident in this country, but we have had several incidents of late that are comparable to what would take place. And I know Dr. Atkinson will speak later on today about traceability, but let's look at this representation of what took place last year in the outbreak of Salmonella St. Paul in produce. And you can see that the first identified case was clear back on about the 16th of April, but it was all the way into early May, mid-May, before there was a recognition of a wider problem. And if you look at the bar graphs, those represent the numbers of people that were infected with the Salmonella St. Paul organism. But imagine, if you will, that those bar graphs represent for animals tens or hundreds or even thousands of animals that would similarly be affected if there were a highly transmissible foreign animal disease. And the fact that this plays out over the course of almost 2 months. And Dr. Atkinson will speak to the need for traceability, just as the absence of traceability hampered their determination of the problem. In a similar fashion, we would see animal disease move along this graph with more and more cases until we finally were able to determine the source of the disease. And then again, transportation plays a significant role in the movement of product throughout the country. You see Salmonella St. Paul because of the transportation of product throughout the country, and because of the extended period due to the absence of traceability, we ended up in the organism ended up in 43 states, District of Columbia, and Canada. And as a practical matter, the organism contained in within the produce was not communicable among produce. It was only transmitted to the humans that consumed the produce. However, in the situation of a foreign animal disease, the disease could easily be transmitted between humans and between animals. So that brings you to the dilemma that's faced through the protection of critical infrastructure. And I think, as Dr. Clifford mentioned, there's currently no direction about how this dilemma will be solved. Historically, we've looked at premises ID, animal ID, and functional animal tracking database. But again, the significant levels of participation are required for success. Traceability for animal disease purposes, you see at 25% participation in the 3 legs of the stool, you have traceability of 4%. If you move to 50% participation in the 3 legs of the stool, your traceability is only 12%. And finally, if you were to attain 95% participation in traceability, you can begin to think in terms of 80-some% for traceability. So there's significant efforts that must be undertaken and decisions made that will allow traceability for both animal health management and for animal disease management. There's no need for me to go through these critical points associated with animal identification, except to point out that bullet number 5, false positive identification of indirect contacts and could potentially avoid unnecessary slaughter. That situation again was manifest during the Salmonella St. Paul because there was not the ability to trace product. The broad brush painted all of produce with the fear of potential contamination, and as a result, in the southeast alone, over $140 million of tomatoes were not marketable because of the drop in consumer demand and unwillingness of consumers to purchase product. An additional point as we think about how this might play out, and I'm sure Dr. Atchison will speak to it, is the Food Safety Enhancement Act of 2009 recently passed the House of Representatives. There are criteria that are proposed for the establishing of regulations for a tracing system, and again, this is not reached the Senate yet, so no one's quite sure how that will play out. But certainly within the food system, there are legislative proposals on the board for traceability. And I think the last thing again is we'll mention and speak to Dr. Clifford and our colleagues at USDA. I think just as we represented our support for USDA in the management, national incident management for a disease outbreak, we offer our support for the animal identification and traceability in whatever form or fashion it takes place. There's little doubt that from our perspective in the protection of critical infrastructure that there are benefits to the agriculture and food sector through traceability. So and DHS supports USDA's outreach to their stakeholders, and DHS also defers to USDA's expertise on the specific requirements of an animal ID system. We do not prefer any particular system, only that for the protection of critical infrastructure, the capability exists to mitigate agricultural events and promote animal health.